Yat e shik ero shene she hastin shia. Greetings, my relatives, my people, fellow educators. I'm Mr. Footracer. This video is a segment on Costa's levels of questioning. And so let's get started right away. Let me share my screen here. Okay, so Costa's levels of questioning. Albert Einstein once said, the most important thing is to never stop questioning. I think as a scientist, we all know that it's so important to not just accept things, but to always question. And as a teacher too, I'm always astounded as to how many questions my students have and for all the things that there are to learn in the world. Always stay curious. Now, Costa was a real person. He was a professor and a researcher, and his work involved dividing questions into three categories. These categories define the complexity or depth of thinking required by different types of questions. He was from emeritus professor from California. All right, in today's video, hopefully your walkaways will, by the end of this video, you'll know a little bit more about Costa's levels of questioning, but you'll be able to help your students to write questions that demonstrate all levels of Costa's levels thinking. You'll help your students to use inquiry methods to develop questions about science content. And lastly, you'll help your students develop questioning skills that increase the higher order process of note content. And a lot of this that I've taken is from the AVID training that we received as teachers. So if you don't know what AVID is, you'll see the AVID sign on a lot of the handouts that I give you. All right, so level one of Costa's levels of thinking. Think of this as the basement. This is the bottom of the house, and this is the foundation. These types of questions are factual. It's about gathering information. So answers point to one fact or detail in the text. Level one questions have only one answer and are very concrete. Words found in level one questions include define, name, match, complete, observe, describe, select, identify, list. If you notice, we have the thinking man with a headband and his bow guard. Navajo, we called it. All right, so in examples of level one questioning could be in science, like define the symbiotic relationship, name the two major types of cells, prokaryotic, eukaryotic, describe natural selection, survival of the fittest, identify the mitochondria on the following diagram. So it could just be a diagram and the student will have to find it, or find me a lysosome, or identify the cell wall or cell membrane. These are just simple ways of engaging our students. And often I think teachers already do questioning. It's just helping our students to be purposeful and in recognizing the varying types of questions there are. As students refine this practice, I usually unroll this Costa's level of thinking at the beginning of the year, and I give them the handouts, I laminate them, and they put this in their science folder so students can always have it as a reference point to go back and forth. And students begin to see too that these are cross-cutting concepts. The things that they learn about Costa's levels of thinking carry over into other subject areas like math, English, social studies, and so forth. For my school district, we are trying to introduce the AVID program, the way of thinking, the way of teaching, at the beginning of the school year. So that really helps our students to become familiar with it, and we begin them a little bit in elementary, but for sure we begin AVID training in 6th grade. So by the time they're the senior, they have a pretty good view of what AVID's all about. All right, so level 2, this is kind of like the main level of the house here. These types of questions are interpretive. They're about process and applying knowledge. Answers inferred from what the text implicitly states or can be found in several places in the text. So level 1, is just verbatim. Here's the information, here's the answer, and so forth. Whereas interpreting and processing are a little bit harder to understand. They have multiple pieces of information that they have to put together to get the answer to synthesize. These often have more than one answer, and answers are derived from evidence in the text or other media. And words found in the level 2 could be like analyze, group words, compare, contrast, infer, classify, sort, or distinguish. One of the things I like to do as a teacher for my beginning of my class, my warm-up, the first 5 minutes as students walk in the door, I have them do an anticipatory set. It could be as simple as, hey, I'm going to list out 20 vocabulary words. I'm going to have my students group them according to how they think, and they're going to pair share with their partner. And then at the end of 5 minutes, we'll come back and we'll do this activity as an entire group. We'll debate where should this vocabulary word be. For instance, if I had all the parts of the nucleus listed out, we have the nucleolus, we have chromosomes or chromatids, we have a nucleus membrane, nuclear membrane. Students could group all those vocabulary words together, and maybe another group of words for the outer part of the cell. Another way to use this could be your closing activity. You can have students do a Venn diagram. Show me the differences and the similarities, a Venn diagram of plant and animal cells. How are they different? How are they similar? This could be a really good activity. This would also be a great extension onto a quiz, a formative assessment. And those hand-drawn Venn diagrams can also be informally assessed in time as the teacher walks around and sees my students got this or they didn't get it. So that's one way of using Costa's levels 2. And like I said, animal versus plant cell. You have centriole, centrosomes, small vacuoles, cilia or flagella in an animal cell, whereas a plant only has a plant wall or chloroplasts and large vacuoles. And the things that they have in common, they have plasma membrane, endoplasmic reticulum, so forth. Some examples of level 2 questions would be compare and contrast plant animal cells. What is the main point of? Group the following vocabulary words into separate categories. Sort the following statements, whether they are a claim, reasoning, or evidence. Okay, now we're going to move into level 3. This is reflective, open-ended. This is all about creating. Answers are suggested by the text. Level 3 questions facilitate deeper learning and the application of acquired knowledge, facts, techniques, and rules. Level 3 questions ask for judgments to be made from information. Words found in level 3 questions can include things like evaluate, apply, hypothesize, imagine, judge, predict, speculate. Again, I think all teachers do the Costa levels of thinking, but it's just being more purposeful in your lessons. And you'll see that the level 3 is the highest form of questioning because it involves taking many sources. And these are things like group projects, taking what you learned in the video, taking what you learned in your text, your homework, maybe a handout, or maybe a research project you did, and combining everything into one. So these are often multi-stepped. They could be essay questions, they could be projects, gallery walks, many different activities and types of questions. Level 3 questions, some examples of this could be, imagine what the world would be like without bees and other pollinators on the earth. We could talk about the history in China where Chairman Mao had some of the sparrows and birds killed, and that caused crickets to overrun and, ended up causing a famine. And we could talk about how the bees are dying out. They're beginning to disappear, the honeybee. What will happen if all our insects die out for our food crops and everything that we eat from breakfast to dinner? How many of those plants or those food sources we get are plant-based and pollinated? Another question we can ask is, can we have students judge the ethics of human genome engineering? In this past year, I had a unit on genetic engineering. We looked at glow-in-the-dark dog and CRISPR. So my students, I asked them this question: if you could, should you? Just because a scientist can do something, should we do it? Should we mess with nature? And we had this lovely debate, philosophical chairs on one side of the room, people who are for genetic engineering, the pros, and then the cons, no. And it was a really fun lesson, and the students had to really prepare their arguments, and they had to do their research to come prepared for it. So a good question could lead an entire lesson or a project. And often it's much harder to ask the right question than to answer. Another example of a Costa 3 question would be to predict what will occur to the Earth's climate if we continue at the current rate of global warming. So in the year 2050, what will our climate be like? 100 years from now, what will the climate be like? And what are the implications for that? So these are all high levels of thinking. Now, you'll find different handouts on the internet. You can do a quick Google search and you'll find Costa's levels of thinking into a house. And we try to tell students, like, level 1 is gathering in the basement. Level 2 would be the main living room, the kitchen, everything. And 3 would kind of be the penthouse, the best part of the house. And kind of the danger of having all these words is students will specifically just use those words, but when they're first learning, it's okay for them to mimic, and eventually they'll get to the point where they can assess and they'll be familiar enough with the process that they can understand, not necessarily a level 1, 2, or 3. If you're working with Indigenous youth, we don't have houses. Traditionally, we lived in hogans, and this hogan was built by my grandfathers, my Che, on my mother's side, and you can see that we have 2 types of hogans. One is a female, and the other is a male hogan. The female is kind of like the family hogan, where we do most of the raising and rearing. Che lives by himself out in his male hogan, and it's much smaller, and it's a different shape. So if I were teaching Costa's levels of thinking, one way that I could be culturally sensitive to the indigenous people that I am teaching at Page High School or Page Unified School District, I could use something like a Hogan. And here I just created my own indigenous version of Costa's levels of questioning. I even have the Navajo written or for words for one, ta'asai is one, nake is two, ta, three. I was thinking about using translating, applying, processing, gathering, but in Navajo it's very descriptive and it would be a much longer phrase. So I think it's okay for basic classroom use to use the English words. And but I think students always appreciate it whenever a non-native person or non-native teacher tries to get a little bit into the world and understand who they are and grow up from. And it lets them know too that they're valued. And as a teacher, this brings me joy when I see my fellow coworkers using Navajo, using not only Navajo words, but Navajo iconography, things that are very familiar to them. So I know all of us have different areas we're teaching at and different languages. So feel free to adjust Costa levels of questioning to your own region, spend some time. And I want to point out too, teaching Diné youth, these colors are purposeful. They're the four sacred colors, the four worlds that we came from. The black mist world to the blue world, the water world to the yellow where all the birds were, and the last is the glittering world. And so these are all things that Navajos would, and Navajo students and youth would be able to identify with right away. Something I do as a teacher is I use sentence frames, and I'll include a handout of this about teaching students how to write those questions. They're not born with that information. It has to be learned, and with consistency, with patience, with repetition, with practice, your students will become better at writing level 1, level 2, level 3 questions. So here's some examples. Maybe let's take, for instance, we're learning about cellular respiration. So I could look at these sentence frames on the left here in level 1, and I could come up with something for cellular respiration. So I can say, what does cellular respiration mean? That's a level 1. How can I take that same concept and make it even more rigorous? Maybe it says here, how can you put your data into graphic form? So maybe I did an experiment on cellular respiration. I'm blowing into a tube. I have a chemical that turns color when it reacts with carbon dioxide, and I plot the various intensities, various levels of carbon dioxide. And now the students at the point, do I do a bar graph? Do I do a line graph? Do I do a scatter plot diagram? So that could be a level 2. It's synthesizing, taking various pieces of information to make one. Taking cellular respiration into the 3rd level, we could say maybe design a lab to show cellular respiration. Instead of giving students directions to do their lab, now they're creating all those steps, they're documenting, they're creating that process, and maybe their format, how they present that information as a PowerPoint. It could be a giant poster on butcher paper. There are lots of ways to show that level 3. And often level 3 questions take time to answer. Okay, so I think I just covered the major parts of Costa's levels of questioning. And I want to say that it has really helped me. Sorry for my phone. It's really helped me as a teacher to engage my students, to have rigor in the classroom. And now I'm at a point where I can just talk to my students, say, hey, what kind of question is this? I'll be teaching a lesson and I'll stop mid-lesson and I'll ask them, what kind of question is this? And they'll look over and we'll work it out together. Other times I might ask students who are finished with their work easily or done early. I might say, hey, can you give me a level 3 question? Can you write it out? Can you do a project? So there are many ways. It's not making things harder, but it's introducing rigor. And there's a difference between hard and rigor. Rigor is engagement. We want our students to know what the lesson is about. We want them to think about the material, to process it, and to synthesize, and all these wonderful things. And the more we concentrate on questioning, we'll find that we'll produce students who are ready for college. But thank you so much for your time. I'll give some handouts, like I said. You can do some searches on your own for the internet. There are a lot of resources out there. But yeah. So let's see if I can exit out of this. Okay, have a good day. We'll see ya.